In the winter of 1887, one village followed a rule more important than prayer, more important than reason, and more important than the church bell itself. Before sunset, every door was locked. No one was allowed outside after dark, not to check the stable, not to fetch wood, not to answer a knock, not even if someone outside sounded like family. At first, outsiders called it superstition, the kind of rule isolated people invent when winter is too long. The roads disappear under snow, and fear starts to sound like wisdom. Then one man broke it. By morning, he was gone. And after that, no one in the village called it superstition again. The village of Vale's End sat beyond the last reliable road, where the hills opened into black pine forest, and the winters lasted long enough to erase the idea of distance. By November, the mud tracks that connected it to the outside world were already hard and dangerous. By December, most wagons stopped coming altogether. Letters arrived late, if they arrived at all. The village survived the way old places survived, by routine, repetition, and rules no one bothered arguing with anymore. The oldest of those rules was the one every child learned before they were old enough to carry water. Before sunset, bar the door, fasten the shutters, and if anything calls from outside after dark, do not answer. No one in Vale's End could agree on when the rule began. Some said it dated back to the first winter settlement. Others said it followed a fever season when people started hearing voices outside after midnight and then vanished by dawn. A few said it had nothing to do with sickness at all. They believed something had always moved between the trees beyond the village, and the rule was simply the first lesson the dead had left behind for the living. What everyone agreed on was simpler. Once long ago, people ignored it. Enough of them disappeared that nobody ever ignored it lightly again. For years, the rule held. Families closed their homes before the final bell. Children were taught never to answer if they heard crying outside. Women did not step into the yard after dark. Men did not unbar the door for livestock, weather, or neighbors. If something needed to wait until morning, it waited until morning. That was how winter worked in Vale's End. Until Elias Harlow came back. Elias had left the village nearly 7 years earlier. He returned in late autumn of 1887 wearing a city coat, carrying books, and talking like a man who had learned to despise every superstition he had grown up with. He was not stupid. That made him more dangerous. If he had been reckless or drunk or cruel, the others would have dismissed him. But Elias was articulate, confident, the sort of man who made old rules sound embarrassing just by saying them out loud. At first, the village tolerated it. Let him laugh, let him talk, let the winter humble him on its own. But Elias did not stop at mocking the rule. He challenged the reason for it. If nobody had seen what was outside after dark, he said, then maybe there was nothing there. Maybe the village had spent decades feeding fear until fear became tradition. Maybe every knock in the night was wind, every cry an animal, every voice no more than grief or loneliness wearing familiar sounds. His sister Mara hated hearing him talk like that once the sun went down. She told him some rules didn't exist to be understood. They existed to be obeyed. Their father said less, but the silence in his face said enough. The first time something came to the Harlow house, it was just after sunset. 3 knocks. Soft. Even. Almost polite. No one moved. Then came a voice from the other side of the door. Low. Male. Familiar. It sounded like Uncle Thomas. Thomas Harlow had died the previous winter. The voice asked to be let in. Mara would later say that the worst part was not how strange it sounded. The worst part was how ordinary it sounded. Not snarling, not inhuman, not theatrical, just tired, cold, mildly impatient, like a relative who had every right to expect the door to open. No one answered. The knocking came again. 3 times. Then nothing. By morning, the snow outside the Harlow house was untouched. No footprints, no boot marks, no drag lines, no sign that anyone or anything had stood there at all. That should have been enough to silence Elias. It wasn't. If anything, it made him more determined. He said, "Winter. Distort sound." He said, "Old houses warp voices." He said, if enough frightened people pass down the same story, the next generation starts hearing what it expects to hear. He said all of that with less confidence than before, but he still said it. 4 nights later, the village gave him another warning. This time, it wasn't knocking. It was crying. A child, thin, weak, freezing. The sound came from outside the Harlow house just after dark. Mara stood up so quickly she nearly overturned her chair. Their father caught her wrist before she reached the latch. They listened as the crying moved through the wind, first from the road, then closer, then beneath the side window. The child never called for help, never said a name, never asked to be let in. It only cried, softly, patiently, as if it knew pity would do the work eventually. The crying lasted nearly 10 minutes. Then it stopped. At dawn, the snow beneath the window was smooth. Again, there were no tracks. By then, even Elias had stopped laughing, but something worse had settled into him instead. Pride. Fear humiliates some people. It hardens others. Elias could no longer admit the village might be right, because by then he had built too much of himself around being the only man in the room who was not afraid. So on the last Thursday of December, he made a promise he should never have made. If anything came to the door again, he would answer it, not because he wanted to die, because he wanted to prove everyone else had been living under a lie. No one came to stop him. That is what people misunderstand about old villages. They imagine outrage, arguments, public warnings. But in places like Vale's End, fear often moves in silence. By the time the final chapel bell faded that night, the entire village already knew what Elias intended to do. They did not try to persuade him. They simply waited to hear if he would survive it. The knocking started close to midnight. 3 knocks, then 3 more, then a pause. Elias stood before the door with an oil lamp in one hand. Mara was behind him. Their father stayed near the hearth, pale and rigid, as if stepping closer would make the thing outside more real. Then a voice came through the wood. Not Uncle Thomas this time, their mother's, soft, tired, almost irritated. "Elias, open the door. It's freezing." Their mother had been dead for 11 years. For 1 second, Mara believed her brother would step back. Instead, he moved closer. He did not throw the door wide. He only lifted the bar and opened it a little. Just enough, he later would have said, to expose the trick. The lamp went out immediately. Not slowly, not with a flicker. Out. The darkness beyond the threshold did not look like normal night. Mara could never describe that part properly, only that it felt full, dense, as if the cold outside had shape. Then something moved. Not footsteps, not claws, not the sound of a person rushing through snow. Just movement. Fast and close and wrong. Their father slammed the door. The bar dropped back into place. Mara screamed, and Elias Harlow was no longer inside the house. At dawn, the search began. The men of Vale's End took rifles, lanterns, ropes, and dogs. They searched the road, the ditches, the frozen chapel yard, the old mill trail, the burial ground, and the first line of forest. They found no trail, no blood, no sign of struggle. Only one thing: Elias's lamp. It stood upright in the snow 20 yards from the house, unbroken, with no footprints anywhere around it. By noon, the village no longer spoke of the incident as a disappearance. They spoke of it the way people speak of weather, plague, or punishment. Something had taken him. And then, after Elias vanished, the voices changed. They stopped sounding like the dead. They started sounding like the living. On New Year's Eve, Widow Greer heard her son Daniel calling from outside the shed, saying one of the horses had slipped. Daniel was asleep in the next room. 2 nights later, the miller's wife heard her own voice outside the back door, repeating the prayer she was whispering by the fire. On the first Sunday of January, half the village heard the chapel bell ring after midnight, even though the bell rope had been cut and tied inside the locked tower before sunset. That was when Father Bell began writing everything down. Not sermons, not scripture, records. Which homes heard the voices? Which names were used? What time the sounds came? What weather seemed to make them worse? Which disappearances followed an opened window, a lifted latch, a half-barred door? One line from his winter record survived longer than the others. It does not break the threshold. It waits for the living to open it. That was the true shape of the rule. Whatever moved outside Vale's End at night did not force entry. It asked, it imitated, it borrowed pity, grief, memory, and love until someone decent made the mistake of answering. That was how it got in. That was how it got them. In late January, a child named Ruth Enner disappeared after her grandmother cracked the back door to throw out hot ash, believing she heard their dog whining in the yard. She would swear for the rest of her life that she never saw anything outside. Only a rush of cold so violent it felt alive. And then the girl was no longer behind her. By February, the village had become something harsher than afraid. It had become disciplined. No one sat near the doors after dark. Mirrors were covered. Livestock were brought in early. Families stopped speaking loudly at night. Children were taught one instruction before anything else. If it knows your name, do not answer. The winter pressed in harder. Snow buried the road. The chapel windows frosted from the outside inward in patterns some said looked like fingers. Father Bell's later pages read less like parish notes and more like the diary of a man trying to document a siege. He wrote of voices beneath floorboards, of windows tapped from the wrong side, of one family hearing their missing daughter asked to be let in 6 days after she was taken. He wrote twice that the thing outside seemed strongest when mocked, and then his record stopped. The official account claimed he died of fever in February of 1888. No one in Vale's End truly believed that. What survived after that winter was smaller, quieter, more obedient. By spring, 7 people were gone, not buried, not recovered, not mourned in the usual way, because no one could honestly say what had happened to them. They had simply answered the dark. Years later, when road access improved and neighboring towns began recording local customs, Vale's End gained a reputation for being unfriendly in winter. Visitors complained that every door was barred too early, every family became silent after sundown, and no child in the village would respond if called from outside after dark, even by a familiar relative. The villagers never defended the custom. They never explained it. They never needed to. They had lived through the winter when someone decided the rule was just fear, and fear was not what took Elias Harlow. There are stories where the horror comes from seeing the monster clearly. This is not one of them. The people of Vale's End did not need to know exactly what stood outside their homes. They only needed to know 3 things. It could imitate, it could wait, and it did not need to break down the door. It only needed one decent person to hear a familiar voice in the dark and decide opening it was the humane thing to do. That is what makes the winter of 1887 so difficult to forget. Not the disappearances, not the snow, not even the voices. The rule. The simple fact that an entire village built its survival around one instruction: do not go outside after dark, do not answer the knocking, and if something out there knows your name, pretend you never heard it at all, because once, one winter, the village forgot why that rule existed, and the dark reminded them.